you're listening to Stefan Livera Podcast, a show about Bitcoin and Austrian economics. Today, for episode 248, my guest is Godfrey Bloom, who rejoins me on the show. He is an Austrian economist, former politician and libertarian author, and we talk a little bit about his thoughts on what government will do to Bitcoin, as well as his experiences learning about Bitcoin. This show brought to you by swanbitcoin.com. Bitcoin has emerged as a major player on the global stage. It has been significantly de-risked over the past year, and at this point, everyone should probably own at least a little. A common way people get started is establishing their initial position with a one-time buy, and then start dollar-cost averaging with automatic recurring buys. Swan Bitcoin is the fastest way from zero to Bitcoin. There's easy sign-up, it's really cheap, there's no altcoins, it is available in all states in the US. Swan supports bank wires for larger amounts and ACH transfers for smaller one-time buys. Swan is the best place to send your friends and family when they are ready to start buying Bitcoin. Send them to swanbitcoin.com/Livera and Swan will drop $10 of free Bitcoin in their account when they become a member. Introducing a new sponsor, CoinKite. Creators of my favorite Bitcoin hardware wallet, the Cold Card, one of the most recommended hardware wallets by Bitcoiners. I think it is the best in the market with awesome features like the ability to use it completely air-gapped. You literally never have to plug it into a computer. You instead plug it to the wall or to a phone power bank. You can initialize it and then you shuttle that wallet over to popular wallets like Spectre Desktop, Electrum, or Blue Wallet to do air-gapped transactions using a micro SD card. This wallet offers very high security at such a relatively low price point, and it also offers PSBT natively, and it works great as part of a multi-signature quorum also. It has so many features that you'll love, like an address explorer, the ability to use passphrases, anti-phishing words, and it's Bitcoin only. Go get yours at coinkite.com and use the code Livera for a discount. Introducing another new sponsor, Compass is an online marketplace which makes it easier for everyone to mine Bitcoin and enhance the Bitcoin network's security, the anti-cloud mining option. Compass helps you buy your own ASIC and secure hosting at great facilities around the world. For years, we have all heard that mining is only profitable if you're investing tons of money, but now, with Compass, everyone is able to tap into economies of scale and access reasonably priced hardware and cheap industrial power rates. And if you're unsure about how to get started with mining Bitcoin, Compass offers hardware and hosting bundles which eliminates the need for advanced technical knowledge and allows you to quickly get started mining Bitcoin with hardware you own. Visit them at minewithcompass.com and start mining Bitcoin today. Godfrey, welcome back to the show. It's great to speak with you again.
A pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me again.
So Godfrey, let's get an update from you. How are things and how has your Bitcoin ride been so far since we last spoke?
It's been fruitful. I bought in October, I think it was, and I got out on top of the spike, rolled it back into gold, which was for technical reasons down, artificial reasons down, and I'm back into Bitcoin again. So it's been an exciting ride, and I've learnt a whole heap more about the whole concept than when we last spoke. So yeah, it's been fun. It's been exciting.
That's great to hear. Now, I guess I would caution though. I mean, for me personally, I'm a hodler, and I would be very, very careful about selling out Bitcoin because I would be so careful that I wouldn't be able to accumulate back at the same, to get again. So, and of course, there's taxes and blah blah blah, accounting costs and so on. But I think it'll be more interesting for the listeners to hear a little bit more about what have you learned in that interim period from October 2020 to now early February 2021.
Well, I've always obviously understood Bitcoin and know about Bitcoin. I just haven't been an investor. So although I was green to investing in Bitcoin, I wasn't green to the concept of Bitcoin. And of course, I'm a huge supporter of not just Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, but I'm a huge supporter of anything which isn't fiat currency. And that's where I start from. If it isn't fiat currency, it's good,
of course,
and that is my view. But I haven't changed my view when I first spoke to you. And some other stuff I've done with other hosts across the globe. I haven't changed my view. I still don't see gold, and I'm a gold bug. I'm a well-known gold bug. I don't see gold and Bitcoin as not being compatible. I just see that it's a diversion of your investment portfolio. And of course, I am a boring or retired boring investment manager for 35 years in the city. And even more boring than that, I managed fixed interest. It doesn't get more boring than that. Although I have to say, with all due humility, I was quite good at it and I won prizes for it. So I know that, and I know about investment, and I know about diversification. And Bitcoin, I believe, takes a big part of that. Cryptocurrency takes a big part of that.
Yeah, so I guess for you then, what is it that you see are the key differences then in how we have to think about when we're buying Bitcoin or investing in Bitcoin as compared to investing in and holding gold?
Well, gold and Bitcoin share a lot of the same characteristics. They do diverge as you go further down the path. But first of all, I'd just like to make clear my point of view, leaving Bitcoin and gold aside just for a moment. We must understand, and I know Bitcoiners understand this, and it's the same as gold bugs. We're not different beasts here. We're all on the same. The goal is the same. We might be taking slightly different paths, but the goal is the same, and that is to get out of the clutches of state money. Now, what we must bear in mind, and I think a lot of people don't fully understand this because they haven't been involved in politics. I came into politics very late in life. I'm an investment banker, a fund manager. And that was 35 years. I came in, obviously, to fight for Brexit. I wanted self-government again for the United Kingdom, and that's why I came into it. It wasn't party politics with a small p. I just wanted my country back. It was as simple as that. So it was a one-stop piece of political, but I was in the belly of the beast for 10 years. I spent 10 years in the European Parliament and 5 of them on the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee. So if you will, I understand how the political thinking, the regulatory thinking is, and the bureaucracy thinks. And you must accept, and everybody must accept, and of course, most people watching your channel here will already accept this, because otherwise they wouldn't be in Bitcoin, or they wouldn't even be tuned into you, that the role of the state, and it doesn't matter whether it's America, it doesn't matter whether it's Europe, Britain, or China, it doesn't matter. The state sees itself, and its goal is complete and total control of the citizen. That is its aim. Now, the only difference between medieval kings who stole your money and stole your cattle and maybe even stole your wives was that the medieval kings did it for your own benefit. But the medieval kings did it because of their benefit. They wanted a bigger castle, better food, better everything. They stole it. What they didn't wear on their sleeve is this appalling fakery that we have with modern governments who steal our money because it's for our benefit. They steal our money because it's going to save the planet, or it's going to save us from some sort of pandemic. There's always a wonderful reason with modern governments how much better. It's a bit like being mugged in the street, bashed over the head and have your money taken. And then the robber whispers in your ear, but the money's going in a good cause. And that's what happens at the moment. It's all in a good cause. It's for your benefit. At the moment, we are living under martial law in the United Kingdom. We're locked in our houses. We have to explain to policemen if our journey is necessary. We didn't have this in the war. We have never been. So this is about total iron control by the state. And the sad thing is, we are all like sheep. We are in the Great Britain now as a nation of sheep. We walk along with masks over our faces when even the World Health Organization, every medical body will tell you that cloth masks over your face will do nothing to stop you either transmitting or getting a virus. It's about state control. We must wear them because it's about state control. And that is how we flag up. We are servants of the state by wearing this mask, which everybody knows, every single doctor knows is useless, but we have to wear them. We have to wear this mask. So this is the sort of problem we've got. It's all about control. Now, if you buy gold, and I'm a gold bug and I always have been, what you've done if you buy gold, you have stepped outside that part of control. You've stepped outside the government controlling money. And of course, if the government doesn't control money, they can't control you. Not really. It's all about money. And of course, we know that from Rothschild. I think it was in the nearly 100 years ago. And he said, it doesn't matter who you vote for. It's who controls the money is actually running your life. So we know that to be. And both gold and Bitcoin are a way of getting out of that trap. But I know with gold, and it has similarities with Bitcoin, it isn't as simple as that. Just buying gold or buying Bitcoin doesn't take you out of their control. And my experience so far, not only with gold bugs, but also with Bitcoin bugs, is that they think it does, and it doesn't. And I know how the government manipulates and can steal gold, potentially steal gold. I also know they can use exactly the same triggers to steal Bitcoin.
Interesting. So I guess one way to consider this is, in what way will the government attempt to control this thing? So the common ones, so up to now, have been things like, oh, we need to stop the terrorists, so we need to stop the money laundering, therefore we need X, Y, and Z. If you are a bank or a financial institution, you must do X, Y, and Z. That's probably the main vector for control that I see currently, though that could change. What do you see as the main, I guess, ostensible reasons for a government to levy additional controls onto Bitcoin?
Well, that's a wonderful, Stefan. That's an absolutely marvelous oxymoron. A sensible government. There is no such thing as a sensible government. They're all sociopaths and crooks, which is why we need gold and we need Bitcoin to get out. So you won't have a rational excuse for trying to steal our gold or Bitcoin any more than there's a rational excuse for martial law with a virus which has killed in Great Britain fewer people than the 1957, 1958, 1968, and 2010 virus. This isn't to do with science or pandemic. This is because they're crunching up control. They need to control. And it is my suspicion, perhaps hypothesis, that they are seeing how far they can go, and it's not just Great Britain, by controlling the population physically when the collapse of fiat currencies comes about. Now, this is where I think they're doing, and they've been trying to do this, of course, for many years when it comes to gold. Forget Bitcoin. Let's park Bitcoin for just a minute and talk about gold. How do they do this with gold? Well, we know that when Nixon came off the gold standard in 1971 and went onto the petrodollar, he printed money. He just printed dollars. Everybody watching your show knows that. They know that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be on your channel. So they know that. So what's actually happening here is, of course, we know that the purchasing power of the dollar has fallen now. The dollar in 1971 today is worth 8 cents. We also know that just this century alone, which is only 20 years, we know that fiat currency against gold, a basket of fiat currencies against gold, has fallen by 80%. Now, this is gold. And this is why central banks and their political associates, partners in crime, if you prefer, they want to control gold. So how do they do this? Now, let's look at my gold holdings. I have gold coins in a security vault in London. So don't come and rob me, anybody, because they're not here. You know, there's a security vault in London, and that's where they are. And it's not a bank, incidentally. It's not a bank, which the state own. No, it's a private security vault. So my gold coins in there, when I bought them, mainly gold was at $1,000 an ounce, and now it's $1,850 an ounce. What it is. I haven't made any money, particularly on gold. What's happened is it's preserved the purchasing power, because what it would buy 10 years ago, it will buy today. And that's what gold's all about. And that gold coin will buy you bed, breakfast, and evening meal. A gold sovereign, 100 years old, would have bought you bed, breakfast, and an evening meal in any capital city in the world. It will do the same today. No more, no less. So it doesn't make money, it protects your money. And gold has been doing that for 5,000 years, which is why I'm a gold bug. But this is how the crafty bit the state does. The state manipulate the price. You would imagine that it would be purchase and sale of bullion that actually drove the price of gold bullion. But of course it isn't. It's paper gold. So we know that paper gold, there's 800 pieces of paper for every piece of gold, or round about that, as I explained in my book. But this is how it's worked. And they therefore can gamble on the price of gold, suppress the price of gold. Who allows this to happen, which in any other field would be illegal? And that's the SEC. That is, Wall Street regulators allow this to happen, allow people to sell forward gold that they don't have. And that's because it suits the central banks for people not to run to gold. They don't want gold to be at the price it should be, which today should be at least $3,000 an ounce. It's so that they can manipulate and suppress the price of gold. And JP Morgan and people like that made massive amounts of money doing that. And every now and again, SEC put a token fine on. They fine them. But JP Morgan just laugh and make up that fine probably in 6 or 7 weeks in their trading and manipulating the price. So they can do this. Now, when we have this big collapse in fiat currency in Great Britain, I'm not sure what it's like in Australia or America, but I suspect it's probably the same. If I buy £50,000 worth of gold coins from a gold coin dealer, bullion dealer in London, I use Baird, but it could be anybody else. They buy that, I buy that, they register that. That is registered with the regulatory authority, because I could be a drug dealer and they're trying to save everybody from drug dealers, So they're not doing it because they're nosy or greedy or nasty. They're doing it to save us all. They're going to save us all for the nasty drug dealers. But they're not, of course. What they're doing is they want to make absolutely sure they know I've got that gold. So like the French in 1720, the Americans, Roosevelt in the 1930s, can come and steal it when they run out of their own gold, which I suspect has already happened. So what they need to do is they can't have the key to my vault in London. They can't have that. But here's the rub, and this is where it comes in line with Bitcoin, all right? And it's no different. They can come along and say, give me your gold. We know you've got the gold, or tell us where it is. If I don't tell them, they then lock me up and suspend the rules of habeas corpus. Now, you may be familiar, I'm sure you are familiar down there, with the situation with Julian Assange, because he's one of your countrymen. He's been locked up for over a year, or ages and ages, going back now. I mean, locked up in embassies or et cetera, et cetera. Because they've suspended the writ of habeas corpus. He's just got off on one charge. There's the judge, very junior judge, said no, the Americans can't have him, because there's a stitch up between the Americans and the British, the CIA and the MI5, of course, they're all in bed together. So they won't release him. Now, all they have to do then with me, if I don't give them the gold, my gold, is they, at a fixed price, they will say, we'll buy it from you for $2,000 an ounce. But we'll all know on the world real markets, it's $5,000 an ounce. This is what Roosevelt did. Oh, what a great man Roosevelt was. What a wonderful president he was. He was the biggest thief in American history. But anyway, there we are. And they can do that. They can lock me up without the writ of habeas corpus, and eventually I will give up the key to my gold. So the price of gold isn't the trading of gold. It's not me selling or buying, or people like me buying or selling gold. And it isn't really secure, no matter how much I pay for wonderful electronic vaults in London and all the rest of it, because all the state need to do is come and knock on my door and lock me up without a writ of habeas corpus until I give it up. Bitcoin is no different.
See, I disagree. But go on,
okay.
Finish your point and then I'll respond.
And by all means, I'm open to persuasion that this isn't the case. Let's say they bring in a law, the IRS bring a law, HMRC bring in a law, whichever tax, they bring a law and they say holding non-state cryptocurrency is now illegal, which is no flight of fancy, is it really? When things get as bad as they're going to get, and then they can easily, because they've got access to your bank accounts, and your regulators have to hold the bank accounts for the last 6 years in this country. I can't believe it's any different in Australia. And they can say, there's a transaction here. Where did it go? And if we think it went to Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. So you then suspend. Here's another major thing that's happened in many other aspects. In the principles of English law, which is the same in Australia and the same in America, the presumption of innocence has gone. The tax and regulatory authorities do not presume innocence. And I've run financial service companies. They come in and I have to prove that I'm not guilty of any misdemeanor under their laws. So you lose the presumption of innocence. They have access to your bank accounts, and they can do exactly the same thing under suspicion, as they have done with Julian Assange for different reasons, and say, we think you hold Bitcoin. If you don't tell us where your Bitcoin is, we won't release you.
So look, certainly, Godfrey, I think some of these things are maybe longer term. They are potentially possible. I just think we are a long way from this kind of like straight up Bitcoin being banned conversation, at least in the Western countries, the USA, the UK, Australia. I think we are a long, long way from that kind of scenario occurring. And I think it's just like from the conversations that I'm having with people who are a little bit, connected into the scene in terms of the US or Australia. I'm not as familiar with the UK, but the conversation that I'm hearing from people, and of course it could change. These things could change. But currently, The situation is more about, I think governments are more concerned with things like KYC, AML laws and KYCing the customers and so on, than they are about some kind of serious monetary threat. And I think in many ways, it's almost like the kinds of people who have to understand it, they're often the last to understand it, right? The central bankers are the last people to understand how you can have this money that's evolving and forming from the bottom up. And so I think that's one important point. I think it's also important to recognize that people can more easily transfer their Bitcoin than their gold internationally without using a custodian. And I think that is a really key, important point that we have to recognize here, because ultimately, if you sense that things are going the wrong way in your country, Bitcoin holders can literally send their Bitcoin and store them in some other jurisdiction. And so there's this competitive pressure between the jurisdictions. So I think it will be more like capital will flow in the direction of those countries with less restrictions over time. And so here's the other thing as well. This became a bit of a meme in a prior cycle, but essentially this whole idea of, China is banning Bitcoin. And it happened so many times that China was banning or unbanning Bitcoin that it just didn't really matter at the end of the day. So ultimately, there will still be the ability for people to earn Bitcoin in a peer-to-peer fashion, or to purchase it in a peer-to-peer fashion, or to be a home miner to mine it in that way. So I just think there's too many sort of ways that people can slip through the cracks, and there's too many ways that governments essentially are in competition with each other because they have to compete. Even today, if we look at something like the whole digital nomad thing, that we're seeing more and more people who are trying to take on that idea. And we're seeing governments who are trying to say, hey, come here, we want you here. Let's have a virtual workers program visa, or let's have a digital nomad visa. And so I think in a similar sense, we're seeing some parts of the world that are very supportive of Bitcoin. So a recent example is the Miami mayor, I forgot his name, but I think he was recently saying, yeah, let's buy some Bitcoin and have it on our books, and we'll try and encourage people to come here. We're seeing regulation and legislation rather in Wyoming of the USA, which is very sort of promising in that regard in terms of full reserve banking and so on. So I just think while it's possible that some countries or some states or some towns will be very anti-Bitcoin, there'll also be those that are very pro-Bitcoin, and any Bitcoin holder will have an incentive to just pick up and leave. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that idea.
Well, I think, Stefan, 5 years ago, I would have agreed with you on all that. But of course, as I say again, I'm talking to you from a country, the United Kingdom of all countries, under martial law. Moreover, we're seeing the coming together now, whether it's at Davos or Doha, the World Economic Forum. We're seeing every senior world leader or retired leader saying, build back better, the new normal. And I think when we see a collapse of fiat currency, I think all previous games are off the board. It isn't going to be, this place is more welcoming. So, this Singapore, for example, is more liberal in these matters or whatever it is. I would have agreed with you up until a few years ago, but I wouldn't have understood that in a democracy that they can take away deconstruct the Constitution, drive a coach and horses through the principles of English law, and hold you without a writ of habeas corpus. So the whole game plan has changed. So it means if you have obviously, if there's a collapse of fiat currency and they want to replace it with state cryptocurrency, which defeats the entire object, as we would both agree. And incidentally, let me just say, I'm not saying this is going to happen tomorrow morning or even next year. What I am saying is that we must not be naive about these dangers when we see a totalitarian system of government. So we have the Fed, we have the ECB, we have the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, everybody getting together to then say we will agree that we must control Bitcoin, whether that means that they facilitate, as the SEC do, running a book on gold, which controls the price to a very large extent, not a total extent. And I would also, Stefan, and I take your point, and gold bugs know this, you can't do that forever. You can't cheat the system forever. But in all fairness, they've been cheating the gold system now for over 25 years. They've been faking the gold system. You can go quite a long time with this. So there's lots of tools that the central banks, if they get together, can do. And yes, you're quite right. You can transfer it. It's easy to transfer, relatively easy, if you don't have counterparty risk in Bitcoin, which I accept and I take. And I'm an investor. I'm an investor in Bitcoin. I understand this. So you can do this. But the thing that makes me uneasy is, yes, they can't get Bitcoin any more than they can get my gold coins, but they can get me, and they can get it on the flimsiest of excuses. And I have to say, Stefan, you and people and Max Kaiser are the first guys going to be banged up in solitary confinement without a writ of habeas corpus until they tell the state where the Bitcoin is. They can't get at the Bitcoin. And then the other thing is, and here I'm still on the learning curve a little bit, Stefan, is let's say that there is a jurisdiction which is Bitcoin friendly, very Bitcoin friendly. How are they going to stand up to the rest of the world's central banking system? What is going to happen if there's central banking agreement, a UN agreement or something, which is already these agreements are already taking place. They don't get much publicity, but they're taking place. What happens if these people say the ultimate problem, of course, that Bitcoin has, it is to be a store of wealth, okay, but it has to be money. It has to be relatively acceptable for goods and services. Now, if I want to buy a new car in a couple of years' time, I want to go down to my dealer and I want to buy a new car for, say, £30,000. I've got £30,000 worth of Bitcoin. He can't take it because it's illegal for him to take Bitcoin. And that just isn't in England. That's in America, and that's in the European Union, which it will be. The state can't let me go and buy anything significant with Bitcoin because they've lost control. They've lost control. So they will have to put these blocks in place. Now, as you say, up until now, they've been muttering about drug dealing and this, that, and the other, so on and so forth. But even Switzerland let information go to the authorities in the European Union, Switzerland, about Russian money. Even Switzerland. And of course, the Swiss gold bugs say, "Oh, Godfrey, for the same thing, put your gold in Switzerland, Godfrey, because they can't get it. They can't get it. Well, they don't need to get it any more than London. They get me, or they get the holder, or a supposed holder. And we're not on our death certificates at the moment. On our death certificates for COVID-19, the real number of deaths in the United Kingdom at the moment for people who aren't already old and ill is about 6,000. And we've had a massive publicity campaign saying it's 100,000. So, and people believe it. People are gullible. And we've seen the behavior of our police, your police in Melbourne, which is shocking. We've seen all this. There is nothing the government won't do to save their own arses and their own bankers. We're dealing with gangsters here. Not the, you say, oh, well, they need to make a reason, or it would be sensible. And coming back to your original oxymoron, sensible government. Sensible government's the thing of the past.
And we're just to clarify, I didn't say ostensible. I didn't say sensible. Just to clarify, I didn't say sensible. I was saying ostensible. So that obviously, I agree with you. They're not sensible. So they'll have to give some reason that to the normies sounds like a good reason, right? And that's where the whole drug laundering, whatever, money laundering, whatever, but certainly I take your point there. But I think Bitcoin currently, and I mean, I guess it's a discussion about what happens in the future. So as we speak today, Bitcoin is, call it $640 billion as a market. I think we aren't even in the serious ballpark of being, of governments doing anything close to that until we get to, 5 trillion or like 10 trillion. Like we probably need another 10x from here before it even starts to be a serious consideration in that kind of conversation. And I think it really depends on who you look at and who you listen to, because there are already some US politicians who actually are very positive, speak positively on Bitcoin. They see it as a store of value, and they see it as a way that perhaps, because these tend to be conservative or libertarian politicians themselves, and they tend to see issues with how US government and obviously many governments around the world are in a very high level of debt. And so they see it like there is a need for this kind of neutral store of value. And so I think it really does matter where the public conversation on Bitcoin goes. And I think the other point to think about as well is, let's say we hit a 10x. Well, we're probably also going to see a 10x in the number of people who hold Bitcoin. And at what point do they become a political voting bloc on which it would not be feasible to do these kinds of, Bitcoin bans or going after people for it? I think that is also part of the conversation. And I think it's sort of similar to the idea of, once Uber got popular enough, it just wasn't politically feasible to ban it. Yes, they could regulate it, but they weren't able to ban it.
All of which I take your point, and I certainly take your point on numbers, and I think it has to get to the 10 trillion. It has to get much bigger than it is now to register. And interestingly enough, that's true of gold, because the average percentage of a investment portfolio in gold is probably averaging less than 2%. So the same arguments apply to gold, which is where they go along the same path, just parallel paths in many ways. And all of this, I understand. But even if they don't ban Bitcoin, there's many ways of making Bitcoin uncomfortable. So you have to turn it back into whatever is the state currency of the day in order to transact. So what most people want is, and I wish it would come about. I'm a true believer because I think Bitcoin will be fantastic. It's so sensible. You've got a Bitcoin, you've got a credit card thingy with Bitcoin, and you can buy shops, you go everywhere and you buy Bitcoin, and which is not degradable as a currency. It's wonderful. It's a brilliant concept. I think it's absolutely fantastic. But having worked for 10 years in the belly of the beast, knowing what these people are, how evil they are, and how sociopathic they are, I wouldn't have believed even only 2 years ago, even knowing this in politics, that I could be locked in my house here for a fake pandemic, and the police will lock me up or fine me £800 on the spot if they find anybody in my house who shouldn't be there having a cup of tea. This is where we're going. And I think the problem that we have with so many people is they don't fully understand. And this isn't even a real crisis. This is a fake crisis. When there's a real crisis, which is the collapse of our banks and the collapse of fear, all games are off. They will do whatever they think they have to do to preserve themselves, not the vote. Voting here is suspended. They've cancelled all the elections, the London elections, the Welsh elections, they've all been cancelled. They cancel elections like that. No protest here, incidentally, because people are sheep. Everyone's turned into a sheep here. So they've actually got rid of the elections. You don't have to worry about electoral popularity. And then when it comes to electoral popularity, of course, what happens to the voting system? Well, we just saw in America, we've just seen some shenanigans in America worthy of any banana republic when you took the rest of the world. And it's the same here, incidentally. It's the same in England when it comes to voting. There's no ID requirements, no nothing. They can fiddle elections. They can suspend elections. They can suspend habeas corpus. And if they make it illegal for the acceptance in these main countries to accept Bitcoin in exchange for goods, you have to transfer your Bitcoin into something else if you want to spend it. Now, you can preserve your wealth with it, but it becomes notional. This is also true to an extent with gold. And please don't think I'm going down the gold versus Bitcoin road, because I'm not. We're trying to have a conversation here to help everybody make decisions, diversify portfolios. But if I put a handful of gold sovereigns in my pocket, I know that they will be acceptable in Buenos Aires, Delhi, New York, Paris. They will accept them. And there's no electronic transfer once they're in my pocket. I fully understand that if I want to do a transaction in Hong Kong to buy something in Hong Kong, gold is very much more difficult than Bitcoin would be if Bitcoin wasn't interfered with by the state. But I think what we need to do is think about what might be happening and looking at government behavior in the last year, all governments, in a year or two's time when a real catastrophe hits. We don't have a real catastrophe. This pandemic isn't real. It's fake, but they're putting in the levers of power already. They're all the levers of power, motivating the police, politicizing the police, giving police extra powers, All these things are happening. The regulators' powers over here have grown in the last 25 years. I mean, I was part of the city negotiation committee or consultancy committee in 1986. I'm an old geezer here. I'm an old man. I've seen it all before. And it was going to be light touch regulation, self-regulation. It's now in the United Kingdom 4 million words in the regulator. There are 4 million words. It is impossible to survive a regulatory inspection without breaking the rules. It is simply impossible. You couldn't do it. And this is one of the problems. And there's millions of other regulations, rules and regulations. All I'm suggesting is I'm not saying gold's better than Bitcoin, because it isn't. It's a similar kind of thing and has the same kind of problems. There is, if you will, there is a degree of complacency with both gold bugs and Bitcoin bugs who, because they've made that step, they bought their gold or they bought their Bitcoin, that they're going to be okay. And I get a feeling that it's not going to be okay either for me as a gold bug or a Bitcoin holder. And I think we need to start thinking about that, accepting that. I think if Bitcoin holders and gold bugs don't accept these coming dangers down the path, we are more likely to fall foul of them. Let's think about them and let's see how that we can circumnavigate them when they come. And when they do come, and they will come, not next year, not the year after necessarily, they will certainly come. We've got to be ready for that.
Back to the show in a moment. Lend at Hodl Hodl is a global Bitcoin-backed lending platform, so you can lend and borrow anonymously on your own terms. This is a peer-to-peer lending solution with a unique multi-signature escrow for each deal, so you can grow your savings and earn return on your investment. So if you have stablecoins lying around, such as USDT, you can create an offer and earn interest by lending. On the other hand, if you hold Bitcoin and you need liquidity and you still want to keep on hodling, well, you can borrow stablecoins and pay interest and then keep on hodling. So with Hodl Hodl's lend platform, you set your own terms and you put up offers depending on how long you want to borrow or lend and the interest rate. Go and check it out at lend.hodlhodl.com. Unchained Capital is building Bitcoin native financial services on a foundation of multi-signature, so you can create a multi-signature vault for ultra-secure long-term storage. So you can build that on your own, or if you need white glove treatment and you want help, they offer a Vault Concierge service where their team will ship you some hardware wallets, they'll teach you about multi-signature, they'll answer your questions, and deposit $1,000 of Bitcoin in your vault. So that's $1,500, but you get $50 off if you use the code Livera. Unchained also offer an OTC desk, and they also offer advanced business accounts with all sorts of features that can help you in terms of moving your corporate treasury to Bitcoin, but where your team still holds the private keys. So go to unchained-capital.com to find out more. And if you're thinking about securing your Bitcoin, don't forget metal seed backups like the Cipher Wheel available at ciphersafe.io. So don't just rely on that piece of paper that comes with your hardware wallet. Make sure you've got a product that is fireproof, waterproof, rust-proof, pet-proof, and tamper-evident. The Cipher Wheel comes in a wheel shape, masks the words of your seed, and you slide in some tiles to relate to each of the words in your 12 or 24 word seed. You want to make sure that you or your loved ones have access to your Bitcoins if an accident occurs. You can go and get yours at ciphersafe.io and use the code Livera. Back to the show. Okay, so Godfrey, let's talk a little bit about, so you're saying this idea of merely purchasing Bitcoin is not enough, and I think I can agree with you there. What would you suggest that Bitcoin people should be doing in addition, over and above merely buying Bitcoin, in your view?
Well, I'm afraid I don't have a wonderful solution any more than I do with gold. And I'm an expert on gold. I'm not an expert on Bitcoin. I just think I think what we should be doing as it gets bigger, we should be forming a serious lobby group, all big business. And as you know, in Washington, of course, and in Brussels, where I work, there were 10,000 lobbyists in Brussels. And this is designed for big business. They don't like small businesses. They don't like the self-employed. Big governments, they can't control them. They hate what they can't control. Now, what governments want is big companies in line with banks. They want it all big and the political government. Now, I don't use the term fascism in a pejoratory term. I don't use it. That's crass. That sort of thing that students do. they mouth, "Oh, fascist," because they don't understand what fascism is. But I do. And you've got to understand it. It's a political system. It may be good, it may be bad. It depends on your point of view, but communism. But fascism basically is a system where it's a joint of big business, politicians, and bureaucracy. The state controls the levers of power, the levers of industry, whereas communism has the ownership of them. They're the two subtle differences, if they're indeed subtle at all. So we've got to understand that. So lobbying, and actually this will help when it gets bigger and more people have Bitcoin, and we need perhaps one or two big companies who will accept Bitcoin across the counter, and people get used to buying stuff with Bitcoin. So if you go into a Mercedes dealer, the Mercedes, and I think this would be a monster step forward, I'm sure you'd agree with me on this, if Mercedes were to say, we will accept Bitcoin in all our showrooms all over the world, that would be and then BMW would have to do the same. When it gets to 10 trillion, Stefan, these big companies will have to do that. But we've already seen, let's take the flip side on the automobile companies. It's all going to be electric. We're talking in this country about electric cars by 2030, I think it is. You could not, or net zero carbon emissions. You could not conceive of a more ludicrous policy, an expensive policy than this. Not being costed, nobody knows about it, but it's green. It's green. Well, anything fantastic, it's green, isn't it? And it's the same old story. The big guys can ride it out and the little guys get screwed. Look at the aviation industry. There will be no British aviation industry in a year's time. I work as a consultant. I'm a director of a company which services on training aviation companies. And I can tell you, governments hate aviation industries because they're not green and people can travel about. They don't like people traveling. Governments don't like people traveling about. I can't come to Australia now. I can't come to Australia. We were supposed to be in Australia this very month. I can't come. We get turned away at the airport now. I don't know whether you know this down in Oz. I can't go to the airport and fly anywhere without a good reason. I've got to prove that I've got a good reason to fly anywhere. You see where I'm coming from for this? You can see where I'm coming from. Just trying to think about, how it might pan out now, and this is the situation now. Already we live in times unimaginable. And I think it's going to get worse. But big business, the way to handle it, because everything is about money, follow the money trail. Every single decision that is made on the planet, follow the money trail. Now, if big business comes on board with Bitcoin, maybe the pressure to accept Bitcoin globally in exchange for goods, and don't forget, money has to be readily available and understood and acceptable as for goods and services. That is something that Bitcoin can't claim at the moment. I certainly hope that it will, and I'm a big supporter, and I hope it does. I don't hope it does just as much as Max Kaiser does, who's got millions of the stuff, which he can't spend. Because he's got to take it back into dollars, or he's got to sell it for currency. He can't get out. And I saw him interviewed the other day, Max, who's probably the biggest, most popular, well-known supporter of Bitcoin for many years. And he was asked, "What are you going to do with it?" And to be brutally frank, he didn't know. He didn't really know.
Well, for him, it's a protest as well. It's not just about making money, right?
And I understand that, and we all agree that. Everybody on this, every Bitcoiner, every gold bug agrees with that. We all hate big state. We hate governments. We hate government money. We're all exactly on the same side, but we really don't want to have our head in the sand on this one.
Of course. And look, I think you make a lot of good points, Godfrey. And I think this is one of those points where there might be some disagreement even amongst the Bitcoin world. So I'll give you one view that is prominent in the Bitcoin world, though it's not the only view. So in the Bitcoin world, as you might have seen, there's the crypto anarchist view, or kind of loosely the anarcho-capitalist version of a crypto person. And so these people would say something more like, they might say something more like, look, we don't need the government. We just want to build open source software, and we just build technology, and we can just kind of get away without, by advancing the technology, making it easy for people to maybe use it more privately or transact and secure their coins and things like that. Where my view is more like, we need a bit of that, but we actually need a multi-pronged strategy. So I do agree that, as Bitcoin rises in value, it will make sense for a lot of Bitcoin holders to put some money into Bitcoin lobbying, right? To try to make sure that Bitcoin stays legal, that you can run your Bitcoin node, that you can hold your private keys, that mining is legal, all of these kinds of things. And I see it like a multi-pronged strategy. So in one way, we're spending time out there teaching the public, hey guys, this is how you can take your financial sovereignty back with Bitcoin. And and let's develop the technology and let's make it easy for people to use it and hold it. But also, I think we have to put some resources and some effort into this whole lobbying approach to keep it legal, keep it, rational. And there are arguments that we can prosecute internally that are at least internally consistent to government. Right now, obviously, I think you and I are libertarians and we want government to be either small or zero and in the anarcho-capitalist camp. But even for them, we can say, hey, look, if you don't support this, that you're going to lose a lot of jobs. You're going to lose a lot of overall competitiveness, and people will flow to other states and other areas. So I think that is an angle that people can try to push. And especially, as you mentioned, if we hit say Bitcoin goes to 10 trillion, we're talking, a solid almost 20 times what the size is today. So there'll be 20 times more people who are using it all over the world. So I think that's an interesting angle that we might see. And I think it's also important to recognize that a lot of this technology has been built and is being used even in spite of bans. So, for example, in Pakistan, despite, governments being anti-Bitcoin, you're seeing daily trade volumes increasing. You're seeing people using home mining. We're seeing people using Bitcoin as a way to get around sanctions. And this is a thing that even in the Iranian situation where there are groups of Iranian listeners and some who have translated episodes of my podcast as educational material, and they're talking about, oh, hey, let's use Bitcoin to get around sanctions. And I guess it's a complicated story because in some ways government will, instead of necessarily banning it, they'll more try to control and regulate and say, okay, you're allowed to hold this Bitcoin, but you need to hold it in this kind of government account or in this kind of certain kind of exchange or this kind of way, or we need to be able to see what you're doing. But at the same time, there's just so many cracks all over the world that, we might have this kind of regulated world and let's say a more free market Bitcoin world or black market or gray market world, but the borders are porous. People can just send them in and out. And I think that will be the case for some time to come. What's your view?
I agree with you entirely on all that. And when I said ban Bitcoin, I mean, let me just rephrase that a little bit. When I say ban Bitcoin, there's all sorts of things government can do without actually banning it. Yeah. They just make it so difficult and awkward. And certainly, of course, it's the same. You mentioned Pakistan, or it's the same with India, which ban gold. I can't take my gold coins into India because if I could take my gold coins into India, I could live very well for quite a long time on just a handful.
Of course.
Because there's a premium, because the banning means a premium on it, as we all know. So, yes, the banning it isn't, they'll never actually ban it. But they can make your life, or they can make the transactions or the life do it. Then, of course, you've got to say, what happens when you've got such powerful things as those central banks, all the main central banks, and you've got your and sponsor? We know that we're not quite sure where this is going, but we don't know the input from people like George Soros, Bill Gates, all these people who have wealth beyond human imagination, who've bought the newspapers here. They've bought mainstream TV here, and they are all supporting the lockdown. You are not allowed to go on TV, even if you're supporting the World Trade Organization, which says lockdown don't work. And we all know they don't work. We all know that's painfully obvious. If they work, we wouldn't be in lockdown 3 in the United Kingdom, would we really? I mean, you don't need the brains of an archbishop, but nobody's allowed to come on mainstream TV and say that. So they control the media, TV. They control everything, and people we don't even know. And certainly don't have the well-being of mankind. You didn't get to be a multi-billionaire when the well-being of mankind. No, dear me, no. No, this is about. They're all sociopaths. They have to be. I used to. Let me just share this with you, if I may, Stefan. When I was a young man, I used to be under the impression that somehow billionaires had something extra. They had an extra dynamic in their head, which made them a bit cleverer than the rest of us, which is why they are multi-billionaires. Of course, now I'm an old man, I've met multi-billionaires. I understand they have something missing in their head. They have no empathy. They have no compassion. They have no moral compass. That is how they got to be multi-billionaires. Not because they're good guys. They're not like the multi-billionaires of yesteryear, like Carnegie and some of the great philanthropists of the 19th century who used all this wealth pro bono publico, which they did, Lord Nuffield, and all these things. No, these guys produce foundations which make it a tax haven for them, and then trying to manipulate global politics. These are bad people.
And you're right that in many cases, businessmen seek to use the state to beat down their competition, to entrench themselves against their competition. And so I guess it's a complicated situation, because when you're trying to explain, well, hold on, there are some billionaires who, maybe you could argue, okay, they've made their money honestly, and others who maybe have made their money using the government, using the guns or the threat of the government to beat down their competition or to sort of manipulate the scenario to their advantage in an unjust way, right? So I guess at the end of the day, it just comes down to how many people really value freedom and how many people will. I guess you make a very good point that a couple of years ago, this all would have been unfathomable, right? This idea that people would just willingly accept the destruction of their livelihoods, their way of life, their businesses, all of these things. But I think that maybe there's something different about this, because we're talking about money, your stored wealth over your life. And I think in many countries around the world, not just the Western, US, UK, Australia, Canada, etc., a lot of other countries where they have a weaker currency. And for them, they have a very strong incentive to try to store some value if they can. And I think a lot of those countries around the world will just that fact of people all buying Bitcoin around the world, it just makes it very difficult to effectively control. So even as you're saying, okay, maybe it's not an outright ban, but even controlling it might just be I think it will end up being very difficult given the availability of the technology, the availability of smartphones, availability of cheap computers like Raspberry Pi machines and things that we can use to run Bitcoin full nodes and so on, that I think it just changes the calculus around trying to stop people from doing it, because I think it's just one of those things where it's like an asymmetry. It's cheaper for you to store it and secure it and put it in multiple jurisdictions and do all those kinds of things than it is for people to sort of go around and stopping everyone. So I think you're right that, of course, the governments of the world could go after Max Kaiser or any other, famous kind of Bitcoin people, but they're not going to be able to stop everyone.
Yes, I think you have a valid point, and I think I knew something would come out of this conversation, because it always does. It did last time, and I think both of us have suddenly gone, that's a good point, and it needs thinking about. My experience so far since October with people outside yourself and the professionals, if you will, is that a lot of people haven't taken it as far in their heads as they should. But I think what's come out of this is, as Bitcoin gets bigger, and it will get bigger, of that there's no doubt. I don't doubt that. The price of Bitcoin will go up over a period of time. All that I think is a given, and it's a given with gold as well. It's a given because it's a question of destruction of fiat currencies. I think there was no one sponsor or organized sponsorship for gold to stop the cheating and facilitating of the SEC cheating the price and manipulating the price of gold. Because the powers that be, the politicians and the central bankers, didn't want that. Very difficult thing to lobby against. So what with Bitcoin is, it has to turn into a mass movement, if you will, on your hypothesis, with which I don't dispute. It has to be a mass movement. The pressure has to be political to an extent, with a small p, but it also has to carry big business with it. The pressure has to mean big business. So somebody has to, and I think the birth big privilege gets to the first big international company, and it doesn't really matter who it is, but I would say automobiles are the natural thing. Whether it's Volkswagen or whoever it is. But then, of course, don't forget Volkswagen is heavily owned by the state as well, the German state. So these things are terribly into, and you mentioned earlier about how multi-billionaires get their money using the state. Tesla, of course, is
now, Tesla is an interesting example, Godfrey, because funnily enough, now, of course, I grant you that Tesla has arguably been a recipient of government subsidies in terms of loans and, the whole renewable aspect of it. However, Elon Musk has come out very much in favor of Bitcoin. He's been talking about it. He's been saying, he's been saying, I wish I was supporting it earlier. I'm late to the party. He's been saying some of these things, and I think it's kind of funny as well that the point you mentioned about the movement. I think that's a very strong point. It's that just as we're seeing now with this whole Wall Street bets GameStop phenomenon, I think many of those same kinds of people in a year or two, some of those people could come into the Bitcoin world, and that same kind of passion and movement might well come into the Bitcoin world, and that could potentially infuse society with this idea of, hey, we want justice, we want monetary justice. Bitcoin is our way of seeking justice.
I hope so, because that would really please me. Because I'm a supporter of cryptocurrencies outside the state, a huge supporter, and that's what I'd like. One of the problems that I've noticed recently, in the last year in Britain, is that people don't value their liberty as much as I do, or much as I thought they would. This martial law that we have has gone virtually unprotested. Not in Eastern Europe, they're pushing back. In Italy, they're pushing back. But in Britain, there's been virtually no pushback at all. People seem to be quite happy to walk around with muzzles on, do as they're told, and all the rest of it. Admittedly, the government's giving them a lot of people money to stay at home. And of course, the entire public sector are on full pay staying at home. So we've got millions and millions of people who are not affected. But the idea that I think people value freedom more when they've come out of a totalitarian system. So your Poles and your East Germans, your Czechs, the people from Eastern and Central Europe who have been in this terrible Soviet system value it more than we do. The trouble with Great Britain is we haven't been invaded since 1066. We have a tendency somehow, and I sometimes wonder how, to win all our wars. I really don't know how we do that, because it's the most disorganized organization in this country. I don't know. But we do all this. So people think it can't happen to them. And if they still inconceivably believe what they hear in mainstream media, people actually listen to the BBC and believe it and pay £150 a year for it, although they moan. If they didn't send their money to the BBC would have to either get advertising or subscriptions, like the 100 other channels that we have. But everybody sits down and writes a check and sends them a check. I mean, Great Britain is simply inconceivable. It's a nation of sheep, docile sheep at that, not even killer sheep. So, yeah. And the other thing, and I just share this with you because another political leader said it to me, and it set me scratching my head a bit. He said, yes, money, people want to protect their money and so on and so forth. And that's all understandable. But he said, we now live, this is certainly true of America, most of the country live paycheck to paycheck. They don't have any savings to worry about. They don't have any investment portfolios. I mean, I'm worried about money and the degradation of money because, I'm an old guy and I've got accumulated wealth and I understand how many bees make five, but most people don't. Most people think the state will go on sending them money, whether they're public sector, pensioners, or their social welfare benefits. There is no conception in this country that this money doesn't come from a magic tree. And we already have a Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's personally a very nice guy. I've met him, but he doesn't understand money at all, bless him. He hasn't a clue. He thinks he's already revving up to try and tax our way out of a recession. He actually believes you can tax your way out of a recession. And he's talking about a wealth tax of 5%, over and above £500,000. You can't buy a decent middle-class house in anywhere, never mind London, in Great Britain, for under 500 grand. So if that's your benchmark for wealth, anything else you've got is going to be hit for 5%. But none of us have any money. We're asset rich. What are we going to sell to give the Chancellor 5% of our wealth, which isn't wealth anyway? The big guys won't pay. pay. Big guys never pay tax. Small guys don't pay tax. They haven't got any money. So it'll be the middle classes that pick up on this tax yet again. And it stifles and tax stifles and all the rest of it. He doesn't have any concept of cutting spending. We have £12 billion a year, 13 billion going in foreign aid. We send some money to China. Yeah, we do in our foreign aid program. We have a high-speed rail system, which is costing 100 billion, that gets businessmen home to Birmingham from London 20 minutes early. That's a lot of money, isn't it? So a Birmingham businessman can have an extra gin and tonic before dinner. So there is no concept of, we have quangos, we have index-linked pensions, which cost billions, probably £750 billion in the books, which is off record sheet with the international accounting standards, which the Chancellor, neither does your Chancellor, present on international accounting standards. They're all crooks. Every single one of them is a crook. And it's going to be it's just like trying to bust the mafia. It's busting the mafia and institutionalized crime. Central banking is institutionalized crime. That's it. It's going to be tough. And the only way we can beat it, you're quite right, we all need to rise up. And the more Bitcoiners, the better, as you quite rightly say. The more of us there are, the better it is, which is why I understand the evangelism of Bitcoiners. I understand that. And I don't sneer at that. But evangelism can be a little bit dangerous if it keeps you focused looking in that direction when somebody's coming up there with a bloody baseball bat. So we need to be careful of all that. Now, I didn't know that Elon Musk had come out in favor of Bitcoin. So you just told me something I didn't know there. That is just the sort of level of individual that needs to come on side. And if he does, and more people do that, but at the moment, although let's have some more people. I tell you who else might be. He's not big on the global stage. We have a guy called the guy who ran with us. It's a big national pub chain here. Who's a radical. Who is a radical. If he came forward, certainly. If every country produced a highly respected private sector entrepreneur who said, "I've got restaurants all over the country and pubs," I would accept Bitcoin. And accidentally, knowing the guy, he's very, very likely to come down that route. If people then see how that would grow us, if people were used to going to get a meal out with their Bitcoin and a drink and couldn't then do that, but of course they're all closed now anyway. So the states closed them. But yeah, it's got to be, Bitcoin has to be a mass movement, and it has to be grassroots is a good thing. Brexit was grassroots. The British nation voted for Brexit because that was absolutely grassroots against the establishment, MSM, the political class, the bureaucratic class, all the crooks and gangsters and banksters. We actually got rid of that, for which I suspect we are now being punished with this martial law because we voted the wrong way. The deep state or the establishment, call it what you will. So there is, but it does need it needs its leaders. And on this, for Bitcoin, it has to be business leaders, not political leaders. Political leaders aren't going to be any use at all, in my view. It has to be business leaders, and there must be one in every free country. There must be one guy in every country who could run the flag of up the mast for independent cryptocurrency. It doesn't have to necessarily be Bitcoin. I know that's a whole different game, and I'm not knowledgeable enough to even discuss that with you. But independent of state cryptocurrency is a wonderful thing, and it must be the future. But we need some leaders, of big business leaders, in my view. I think that's a point we could perhaps end on in full agreement, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. I think it ultimately comes down to the question of how do you build a movement? And as you're saying, having leaders can help. I think Bitcoin in some ways eschews having specific leaders, if you will, but in the sense that people are prominent and well-known advocates, certainly Bitcoin has those. And I think one point I would probably amend a little bit is not as much about day-to-day, like receiving Bitcoin, but more about this message of saving Bitcoin. And so I think this is where the Michael Saylor or Jack Dorsey with Square, that kind of message about not necessarily having it for day-to-day spending, but thinking of it as, hey, I'm going to use it for my corporate treasury. And as individuals, we can use it for our individual treasury and we hold it. And so that is, I think, the other point around building the base. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to grow the base, right?
Absolutely. And I agree. And of course, that's how I use mine. That's my Bitcoin. I only, there was a bit of an unusual situation when it had just spiked. And of course, being a professional investor, I just doubled my money on Bitcoin And I'm afraid I know when I walked away from it because there was also a fake transactional reason for gold to be down that week, which details of which I won't bore you, but it was technical, and you know all about that anyway. And there's still technical positions which might be coming out this very day we're talking about, actually, the fake suppression of precious metals. But leaving that aside, that was a sort of window that I pounced on. I'm not a trader, incidentally. I'm a long-term investor on everything I do. Very boring. But that flicked up the screen on me, and I said, make that trade now and come back, and I did. But it's not something I intend to do much of, that kind of thing. No, it's parking it, diversification. And another thing that I have experience, because I've got a lot of input from Bitcoiners from all over the world on Twitter and stuff like that, for which I now thank everybody, because that's been extremely helpful, is diversification. There must be, if you're, I would argue that never have your entire life savings in one thing in one place. It's a little bit do what I say, not do what I do, because I am very heavily involved, in gold. It's, I am probably 70% gold, but then I've got real estate, and I've got, other stuff, and I'm building my Bitcoin now. I'm building that diversification portfolio. But I do counsel. So when I look up the people that Twitter me, Stefan, and I look them up sometimes just to see if I can get a little bit of a feel who's coming back to me. I would say certainly 80% are free thinkers, as you would expect, people who understand the overall situation about money. But you will also find that they will be artists or musicians or all sorts of, but they're not in the professional sphere, and therefore perhaps don't understand the need to diversify if that's all they've got. And that would be a counsel, which is why I'm diversifying out of gold into Bitcoin on a very small scale, but that will grow a bit. And I think people who are 100% Bitcoin might like to go just a little bit the other track. But there we are. That's a personal thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's ultimately up to each person. They've got to decide that based on their own situation. So I guess that's for each person to decide their own thing. But look, I think that's probably a good spot to finish up. So Godfrey, where can listeners find you online?
My website is best, which is simple. It's just Godfrey Bloom, smallcase.uk. And all my stuff's on the articles, everything, not just about Bitcoin, but about the pandemic, fake statistics, and all the stuff that we all have to put up with all the time, being fed bullshit by the state.
Of course, I very much agree with you there. There's a lot of overreaction in terms of what's going on with all of this stuff. But nevertheless, I really enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you for joining me, Godfrey.
Great pleasure. Thank you so much.
So what's your view on building a movement and the more cypherpunk goal of using technology versus using some aspect of the political process and lobbying? I'm curious to know your thoughts. You can also find the show notes and the transcript for this episode, which will go up on a slight delay, stefanlivera.com/248 for this episode. Thanks for listening, and I will see you in the Citadels.